Michael Harte, editor of Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. I understand you sort of manifested working on this film because you were watching Michael J. Fox films while you were editing Third Uncle Strangers, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what happened. I looked at it in a film that's about kind of being true to yourself and honest. I should come clean and say, when I was young, I was obsessed with Michael J. Fox movies and Michael J. Fox. And, I wasn't very good at sports in school, and I'd watched a lot of movies, and more often than not, I was kind of drawn to Michael's movies and his characters, and especially Back to the Future. He was an Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I definitely wasn't. So he was my guy growing up, and I got obsessed, like literally obsessed with his movies, and still am with Back to the Future. And it's one of the reasons I became an editor because of him and his movies. So cut to like when I think it was 3 4 years ago, cutting three identical strangers, and we talked a bit about Michael J. Fox movies because we wanted the opening of that documentary to feel like an 80s movie, and approached the agent and his agent and said, look, would there be any possibility we could make a documentary about him? And he said, you're too late. Davis Guggenheim is making it, but he needs an editor. So we got lucky, and he needed an editor, but he just didn't know that he had a super fan on his hands who kind of knew a lot of the material. So
Hmm.
it was
Yeah,
it was nice.
it was meant to be. So,
I think
well,
so.
yeah. Well, the doc is so unique, like the style, because it's a mix of narration from his audiobooks and
Mm,
then obviously archival footage from his work and interview with him and also recreations.
yes.
So what was that like Davis's plan from the beginning, or that's just somehow evolved throughout the process?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. Actually, Davis's biggest direction at the top of the project. I mean, there was nothing, there was no material. We hadn't shot anything when I joined. He brought me on board, and the only kind of idea he had was this needs to feel like a wild ride. It needs to feel like kind of like a Michael J. Fox movie from the 80s, and we should, let's not always lean into the standard documentary techniques. We can be creative with this because he's such a unique character, and so let's make something unique that is reflective of his character. And I began with his audiobook, Lucky Man. So that's where I started. I knew it, obviously, I knew it because it was Michael J. Fox. But I listened to it and broke that down into it's about. He read it. He wrote a really good book called Lucky Man about 2001. But luckily for us, he'd recorded it in an audiobook, and his voice sounds great. So I used that as a starting point and structure, and created a structure to his story of his Hollywood story initially. And we just listened to it and went to LA, and we listened to it together, me and Davis. And Davis started imagining um, scenes with Michael as in recreations. But I had a big issue with it because I'm like, this is not Michael J. Fox. I couldn't accept that an actor would play Michael J. Fox. I just couldn't get in my head. And I've worked on documentaries before where you use recreations, and sometimes they can really work, sometimes they can't. And what you have to do in docs, especially when it's about somebody famous, is you will show the back of their head a lot. You'll see this a lot in documentaries, and I've started to kind of move away from that a bit, um, because I think if you use it too much, it's distancing, and you're just looking at the back of someone's head. And I think eventually it feels like you're in a movie with somebody really in a movie theater with somebody who's really tall just sitting in front of you, and you can't see the screen. And also you are just crying out to see their face, to connect to them, to see their eyes, so it can feel distancing. And I didn't know initially. I was like, I don't think this is going to work. But one day I was in, we were storyboarding these things. We had a guy in Barcelona who was storyboarding these scenes, and and then one day I was kind of editing on my own in the edit in London, and I had a scene from Bright Lights Big City where Michael is flicking through just a couple of sheets of paper, and the audiobook scene that we were looking at the time, he was talking about getting a script for Back to the Future. So I thought, well, I mean, what would happen if we took the shot from this movie and put it on top of the audiobook? And I thought it was cool because I'm a Michael J. Fox fan and a Back to the Future fan, and it worked for me. But then I took a piece of music, uh, Alan Silvestri's famous score from Back to the Future, and it's that little tinkle that goes like diddle, and he's hinting at Back to the Future without giving it away. When we put those three things together, I mean, I got like very excited about it. But again, I'm a super fan, so I didn't want to get too excited. So I sent the clip to Davis. He was in LA at the time, and I was cutting in London initially when we were trying to find the grammar of the movie. And then I get a call from him the next day, and he said, "You need to call me." And I thought I'm either getting fired or because it was a kind of off the wall idea that I'd seen once or twice, but not to this. And he said, This is one of the tricks of the movie. This is the a grammar that we can use to tell the story, and we can go for it." And then I think one of the producers said, "But there's so much Michael J. Fox movies, and how are we going to watch all this stuff?" And I said, "I hold my beer. I know
I
the
know them
stuff."
all. So it's okay.
So they paid me to watch them all over again, which was great.
Yeah, I think it's a very bold choice, and maybe you're kind of taken aback in the beginning, but it works
Yeah,
ultimately once
yeah.
you watch.
Thank you.
But that Back to the Future, that whole sequence when he's filming that and Family Ties at the same time, you have this incredible montage of him just
Thank you.
going back and forth between the sets. What was it like editing that?
It's like, I mean, it was my dream to edit something like that. I think I remembered reading it when I read the book first, and it always stuck with me, that scene, and I imagined in my head what he would do. But I think when we figured out that we can play with his movies in an interesting way, that scene became unlimited. What we could do with it, there were so many ways we could shoot it. There's so many ways we could edit it. You've also got the score from Back to the Future underneath it. To think that I could cut anything with the score from Back to the Future, so that raised the bar. It was like, we have to match that. If we're going to use that track, the theme music from Back to the Future, we better earn it. So I loved editing it, but it was one of those scenes, and I don't know if any of the other editors are the same, but it was a scene I kept going back to. So I would cut a scene, and then I would take a break, and maybe about 5 o'clock in the evening, I would start just chipping away at the scene, and I basically cut it for like 6 months on and off by always perfecting it, always getting it right, and my worry in the back of my mind was always, will we get the rights to use the music? Will we get the rights to these clips from Family Ties and Back to the Future? And that was always bubbling in the back of my mind. But I thought, just commit to it anyway. And if it's as good as it can be, then we'll have earned using the music and earned the rights to use all these clips. So thankfully we did.
Yeah, for sure.
People seem to like it.
Well, one of my favorite moments is in the beginning of the film. One of the verite scenes, like the present day footage of Michael, and he is walking on the street, and he greets a fan and walks past her, and then he trips, and he says, "You knocked me off my feet," and it's just like, it really sets the tone for the rest of the
Totally.
doc. It's so, it's like his comedic timing, obviously genius, and so
Yeah.
playful and honest, and he has this debilitating disease, but there's no self-pity. So what was it like getting that footage where you immediately like, we got to include this in the film?
Actually, I wasn't, because when I saw it first, I was listening to a different microphone. I was listening to I think the boom mic that was shooting at the bottom of the street. So I didn't hear him say the line, "You've knocked me off my feet." So I watched it, and I was like, this is really uncomfortable. I don't think we could use it, but it's definitely not for the start of the movie. And I spoke to Davis, and I knew he was excited about it. And he said, have you watched that clip?" And I said, "Yeah, it's good. Maybe we'll act three or something." He was like, "Really? Are you sure? What did you?" And then he told me, he said, "Have you listened to it?" I switched mics, put it back, listened to it again, and it was like, okay, this is everything. This, exactly like you said, this is going to set the tone for the rest of the movie. Because I, you know, I I've worked on, well, for a while I worked on a lot of documentaries about with stories that people weren't very familiar with, like Three Identical Strangers, and even Don't Fuck with Cats, where it was like stranger in fiction stories, and you surprise the audience with the plot and with the story, and they almost think, "I can't believe I don't know this story." The issue I had with this, even though I always wanted to work on it, was everybody knows Michael J. Fox's story. So how do you do that in a unique way, without just feeling like a Wikipedia page? And what I realized when I heard that line, and even before that, the more I thought about it, is the secret weapon you have when you do a story about a celebrity like Michael J. Fox or any celebrity. You have a secret weapon, which is the audience's expectation of what they think they're going to get, because they already know the story in their head, and you can subvert that. So when I heard that line, I was like, we can immediately subvert the audience's expectations. There's also a key line before that when he's speaking to Davis, and Davis says to him, um, is this a sad sack story about a guy who gets Parkinson's and it crushes him?" And Michael says the line, "Nah, that's boring." As soon as he said that, and as soon as he said the line, it allowed us to go in a different direction. This is not a film that you're expecting. It's not about just about. It's about Parkinson's. It is there, but it is Michael being upbeat about this, and ultimately it just allowed us to make a film that was very, very funny, because he's very funny and he uses his humor as a weapon, and did throughout the documentary. And and it's funny because when I talked to Davis about it initially, I thought everything needs to be told in archive, and Davis wanted to use a lot of recreations, but actually it was when Michael J. Fox showed up and did his interview. He owned the movie, he set the tone for it, and it became, a Michael J. Fox movie ultimately.
Yeah, you cannot have him in there, and then he gave
Yeah.
everyone permission to laugh. Like that was really key. So
Exactly. And I remember going to Sundance to premiere it, and I was, I was terrified, because I was like, I don't know if it's going to work. And I said to Davis, I remember thinking beforehand, that scene when he falls over and gets up, if we don't get a laugh, this film is done. It's not going to work, because that is the tone of the next 80% of the movie. And we were sat there, and Michael J. Fox was sat behind me. The pressure of watching that with him at Sundance and thinking, is this going to work? And he said, I remember he said the line, it was like just this wave of laughter that started in the theater, and you could tell, and it wasn't just laughter, it was relief. It was
yeah,
like comic relief, and he gave the audience permission to laugh, and permission to look at him in a completely different way, in a way that you weren't expecting him to.
yeah, for sure. Well, Michael, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your
Thanks.
time.